President Museveni's speech on Thursday was peppered with jocular craft, colorful metaphors and rosy figures, predicting that Uganda's economy would bounce back from a blip to emerge as one of the fastest growing economies in the world.
In Ntungamo, when the women were selling the local alcohol, and if somebody did not have money, you go from seller to seller, let me test. Then you go testing, and by the time you have finished all the sellers...
Appearing bullish, the president hailed the health of the economy and investment in energy and infrastructure despite worsening unemployment, poverty and rising debt. With the construction of well-paved roads and the row of turbines as dark pockets of the country are lit, investment in energy and roads have taken the lion's share. But there's little to rejoice for a majority of Ugandans battered by rising commodity prices and expenses.
The size of the economy is now shillings 109 trillion.7. This is in the financial year 2018-2019. This is equivalent to US dollars 29.5 billion. The income per person is now equivalent to US dollars 800. Although this is below the level required to attain the middle income status, the renewed impetus of the economy and the large economic base being created will catapult the economy to prosperity within a short period in the future.
The exact figure of GDP per capita is not $800 as read in the president's speech, but $725, which confines Uganda to 12th position from the bottom on the list of countries. Still a distance from Uganda's lofty dream, the $725 per capita is well below the required $1,006 for lower middle-income status. With a fast expanding population, there are fears that this may not be realized soon. GDP, which stands at $29 billion, a figure that economists in the finance ministry like to flaunt as a measure of success, has for a while remained a subject of discussion as not being reflective of the health of the economy, particularly in light of poverty, the widening income inequality gap, and the near to stagnation of key sectors like agriculture that employs a majority of Ugandans. The president revealed that the economy is expected to grow at 7% amid its rising debt, which according to the IMF will rise to 45.7% to GDP ratio in the next financial year and eventually reach 50.7% in the 2021-22 financial year due. The bulk of the debt incurred is towards commercial oil production and infrastructure projects. Yet with a move towards clean and renewable energy in the West, away from fossil fuels, there are fears that the return on oil production investment could decline the longer it takes to pump the first barrel out of the Albertine belt.
Which is in the hands of the partners. They are the ones that are bringing the bulk of the money to invest into this country. And for them to make a final investment decision, they also have to assure themselves that certain issues are in place. And so those are the areas where we have been preparing on our part as government. We've done very well to make sure that the policies, the laws, the regulations, the institutions, everything is in place.
Fearing that some of the projects where debt has been sunk may not generate the envisaged return, the IMF indicates that out of every 15 shillings collected in revenue will be spent on interest payment in the next financial year. The government has always said that Uganda's debt is still sustainable. The president also spoke about the move towards sustaining exports through industrialization.
Uganda's economic growth and development outlook is positive, with the economy projected to grow at least 7% in the medium term, but could even be higher, given that we have now sorted out the key constraints to growth. Therefore, a firm foundation for industrialization and especially manufacturing has been laid.
there have been, areas of fiscal issues related to, for example, every time you create a new district, a political unit, you have to allocate it funds that would have otherwise gone into productive areas. Then for some reason, we've struggled with the balance of payments, which is the difference between the exports and the imports. Right now, our exports are at about $4 billion, and now imports about $8 billion. Now, what that means is that our economy is always in constant search of dollars, and investors, while they invest US dollars, the return on their USD is not as high because of the depreciation of the shilling, and that remains the biggest risk. So there hasn't been that much transformation with the 6% growth.
State Minister for Privatization, Evelyn Anite, says this is a work in progress.
And he mentioned the intervention that as a government that we have put in place to make sure that industrialization actually happens at a rapid speed. Now, if you give electricity to manufacturing at a higher price, higher than the 5 cents that we've proposed, maybe it's 11 cents, it only makes it very expensive for manufacturers to be able to manufacture in the country.
Isaac Shinyenkwa, a research fellow at Economic Policy Research Center, a think tank at Makerere University, says cheap capital could transform industrialization.
Serious industrialization, you need some involvement of the state at a very, very strategic level. The government needs to identify sectors that are instrumental in terms of sequencing. What do you begin with? And I think I see it right now. We need to begin with electricity and infrastructure. That's what was missing. It's on there right now. And then funding. Funding is a big, commercial banks cannot fund industrialization because the interests are very high and their growth period is very short. You need 10, 15, 25 years.
Yet despite large investments in roads, energy, industrial parks, and the provision of free land to foreign investors, the contribution of manufacturing to the economy remains below 10%. Local investors continue to be strangulated by high electricity prices and an unfavorable playing field against their foreign counterparts. According to Southern and Eastern Africa Trade Information and Negotiations Institute, Siatini, Uganda lost 1.4 trillion shillings in tax exemptions to foreign firms during the 2017-2018 financial year. In theory, the country has realized remarkable economic growth in the size of its GDP since the 1990s. But this growth does not tally with tests such as a decent standard of life. A September 2018 survey by Twaweza highlighted that poverty remains an entrenched problem in Uganda even when economic growth has held steady at around 5% in recent years. The survey indicated that economic growth has not reached everyone, reinforcing the earlier Uganda Bureau of Statistics findings that the number of people living in poverty now stands at a staggering 10 million, up from 6.6 million. According to the World Bank, someone is regarded poor if they live below the purchasing power parity of $1.90, which is the equivalent of 4,000 Uganda shillings. The World Bank says between 1993 and 2006, the number of people living in poverty in Uganda dropped by an average of 1.9% per year. This progress slowed down in the 10 years that followed, and out of every 3 people that climbed out of poverty in the decade to 2016, 2 fell back in.
And but in the last few years, since we started planning through the National Development Plan, emphasis has been on structural transformation, where we have to put infrastructure in place and others. And these are not likely to translate quickly into people's household incomes. So maybe we need to come in with the safety nets to be able to address this. So the growth has been there, yes, but the distribution of this growth is quite a big challenge.
As poverty levels grow, so is inequality. In a 2017 report titled Who is Growing, Oxfam detailed that income inequality has increased significantly since the 1990s, where the relatively few have benefited from economic gains in Uganda. The richest 10% of the population enjoy 35.7% of national income, while the poorest 10% claim a mega 2.5%, and the poorest 20% have only 5.8%. Those at the bottom are on a downward poverty spiral, while those at the top are on an upward trend, reads the Oxfam report. The problem is further aggravated by the high levels of unemployment, which according to the State of Uganda Population Report released last November is estimated at 6.5%, largely due to a mismatch between skills obtained through the education system and labor market demands. Figures from the 2014 national census showed that 58% of the population in the productive age bracket of between 14 and 64 years, about 10.4 million people, is unemployed. Statistics also show that the average monthly income for the employed is below a paltry 200,000 shillings. The Global Competitive Index describes the most problematic factors in doing business in Uganda as corruption, lack of access to credit, and poor infrastructure. The president highlighted this by reinforcing that his government will continue to prioritize investment in infrastructure.
So that struggle to bring down the cost of electricity, the cost of transport, the good roads are good, but they cannot bring down transport costs very, very much, because road transport is more expensive than railway transport and water transport. So, in terms of building the economic base, it is electricity, abundant and cheap, at least for manufacturing.
Energy Minister Irene Muloni opined that investment in the energy sector will have a multiplier effect.
It's a foundation on which everything else builds. If you want factories that are going to add value and create jobs for our youth, what do you need? You need electricity. The issue is, let's harness the renewable sources that we have in the country at the least cost possible, so that we are able to have enough of it to support the industries in the country, to reach for value addition throughout the country. This is going to better the lives of our people, and definitely the return on investment will go up.
However, there's a growing concern that the rate of return on some of the investments is low in the short and medium term, and yet the country's stock of public debt continues to spiral out of control. With the prospects of oil revenues seemingly still in a distance, the alternative is for government to prioritize key sectors such as agriculture, which according to the last census employed 70% of the population. But with little progress towards the much vaunted commercialization of the sector, absence of low interest rate credit banks, established markets, and silos to preserve bumper harvests, agriculture remains largely rudimentary.
I would favor intervention in agriculture, and by that specifically mechanization to increase productivity, matched by policies that allow better storage and processing. While we look so much about the economic growth and where it's going, people should never forget, the macroeconomics, the short term, because for us, that's where the biggest risk is.
Corruption, largely amongst high-ranking government officials, also remains problematic.
Now, when the citizens don't demand for accountability for what they are entitled to, it enables the public officials to gain a certain amount of impunity, so they will continue to take and take from the coffers of government because nobody is complaining.
Beyond corruption, a complex wave of financial fraud through illicit financial flows has depleted the country of billions of dollars. Most of these funds are stolen through commercial tax evasion, money laundering, trade misinvoicing, under-declaring and tax exemptions, with multinational firms keeping this illicit wealth layered in safe havens and secrecy jurisdictions away from the prying eyes of investigators. Many of these foreign firms in Uganda have hired powerful lobbyists to protect their interests. For a country to prosper, it must be able to stamp out crime. But crime, especially murders, continue to rise as security agencies and investigators paper over cracks, while the president's conspicuous silence on Rwanda during his speech attempted to mask the gravity of the conflict between the Kampala and Kigali regimes.